Hey, welcome to Wednesday night. Excited to be back. It's good to hang out midweek. All right, so those of you who are very excited about going back into Daniel, I promised you all of my notes that I didn't give you on Sundays. We're going back into them. Hope you enjoyed our brief look into Proverbs. Got some wisdom over the past few weeks, and now we're going to jump back into Daniel. So first thing I'm going to do is jump back into Daniel 5. For those of you tracking with us on Sundays, Sam is speaking on Psalm 37 this week, so we're excited about that. Those of you who heard last week, remember to go through Psalm 1 and Psalm 25 this week and understand how those two things are linked, right? One is the two paths, and then one is how we communicate with God and how we're encouraged when we choose the right path. All right, so Daniel 5. Daniel 5 is where we're going to start. You're like, hey, didn't we go through Daniel 5? Yeah, in May, Pastor Eric Samuelson went through Daniel 5 and did a fantastic job. So I'm not looking to rebut any of the things that he says. I'm just going to give you my notes and my take on Daniel chapter 5. You know, you can give a bunch of pastors the same chapter and they're going to pull different things out of it. So I'm going to try to do that as well. So Daniel 5. How many of you have heard the phrase, the writing is on the wall? It generally means that the answer is easy or in plain sight. Or on a deeper level, it means that something bad's about to happen, that your fate has been sealed. The theme song from the 007 movie Spectre says, how do I live? How do I breathe? When you're not here, I'm suffocating. I want to feel love run through my blood. Tell me, is this where I give it all up? For you, I have to risk it all because the writing's on the wall. Well, that phrase comes from Daniel 5. Let's set the stage. The year is 539 BC. Nearly 70 years have passed. 70 years have passed since Daniel and his friends were brought in chains to Babylon. Daniel's an old man now, well over 80. Nebuchadnezzar is dead. He has been for about 23 years. And Belshazzar, his uber-privileged, spoiled grandson, is on the throne. Belshazzar is hosting a party, an all-out rager in our terms. We know that, by the way, because the Aramaic word for wine used in verse 1 to describe the party literally means lots of wine. Brookridge Community Church does not condone all-out ragers, by the way. Suddenly, as they're partying it up, a mysterious floating hand appears and begins to carve a message into the plaster on the wall. Talk about terrifying, like freaky. I mean, imagine what the moment would have been like. You're at a party, and a severed floating hand appears and begins etching 3 mysterious words into the wall and then just disappears. And the 3 words were numbered, weighted, and divided. People start screaming. Party descends into chaos. Babylonian wise men are summoned, but as usual, if you track through Daniel, none of them can tell the king what it means, so no shocker there. But the elderly queen, Nebuchadnezzar's widow, Belshazzar's grandmother, says, I once knew a man who could interpret messages like this. She tells them about Daniel. Evidently, Daniel has long since retired from public life, or maybe just been put out to pasture. Either way, they send for him, and he comes in. He reads the message on the wall and says this. In verse 26, Mene, Mene, the word meaning numbered, means God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Then Tekel, the word meaning weighed, it means you've been weighed in the divine balances and been found wanting or deficient. Unlike his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar had never humbled himself before God. And then Perez or Parsin, the word meaning divided, means your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So the reality was, less than 50 miles away, the army of the Medes and the Persians had coalesced and they were ready to mount an attack against Babylon. And that very night, Babylon would be overthrown, and Belshazzar and all the royal family would die. The story is about how God ultimately brought down the prideful, rebellious, unjust Babylonian Empire and kept his promise to restore his people to their promised land. But the story also gives us a picture of how God deals with prideful, rebellious people in all times and places. So I want to look at the story through a couple lenses, what it meant for Babylon and what it means for us. I'm going to give you 4 thoughts. 2 this week, 2 next week. Number 1, the folly of partying in the face of death. Number 2, our wise men have failed us. And then next week, the writing is on the wall for all of us, and God's finger has appeared to us. By the way, historical tidbit before we get started. For years, and years, Religion 101 classes at universities took this particular story about Belshazzar as proof that you couldn't trust the Bible. Because every historian knew, they said, that the last king in Babylon was a guy named Nabonidus. In fact, there was no historical proof that any king named Belshazzar had ever lived. So boom, Bible isn't true, made up myths. But then not too long ago, some archaeologists dug up an inscription in the Iraqi desert right around the place where Babylon would have been. And guess what it revealed? Nabonidus had, just a couple of years before this, moved out into the desert and left his son Belshazzar in charge as acting king of Babylon. So boom, back at you. The Bible is historically reliable after all. That's why, by the way, in the story, Belshazzar offered Daniel a reward as the third highest place in the kingdom, because technically his dad was still first and he, Belshazzar, was second. My point here is not to disrespect secular historians or to imply that most don't do very good work. Just to say, when somebody tells you history or science proves the Bible wrong, just give it a little time and you'll see that the apparent contradiction usually clears up when we gain a little more information or a better understanding of what the author was saying. Here we go. 4 lessons learned from Daniel 5. Number 1, the folly of partying in the face of death. What's unusual about this party is that Belshazzar knew the combined armies of the Medes and the Persians were less than 50 miles away. Everybody in Babylon knew that, and everybody was on edge. This wasn't the first time the city had been attacked, but this one seemed different. This was a humongous and well-organized army. So why, in the face of this danger, is he throwing a party? We don't know. Maybe he's trying to put on a brave face to inspire everyone by his courage. Maybe he's trying to drown out his own fears and amusement and alcohol. Maybe he's just so arrogant that he thinks that Babylon could never fall. You remember all the crazy ways people responded to the turning of the millennium at the end of 1999? Those of you who are younger won't remember this, but there were all these doomsday theories about this Y2K computer bug that would cause a global computer crash that would bring civilization as we knew it to a screeching halt. Power grids would fail. The food supply chains would break down. Money would evaporate from banks. There'd be gas shortages. And you know how that goes. People were genuinely worried. Some people responded by stockpiling. A lot of Christians I knew were in that category. Others responded by partying. It even became a phrase, party like it's 1999. How many of you were a little scared when the clock flipped that night? When you look back. Well, Belshazzar partied in the face of death. He partied like it was 539 BC. Why do people do this? Well, the philosopher Blaise Pascal said the most consistent human reaction to unpleasant thoughts about their mortality is distracting themselves with amusement. He said, life is like being in a stagecoach that's barreling toward a cliff. You know the cliff is coming, and you can't stop the stagecoach or get out of it. But instead of thinking about your coming death and what it means for you, you start to distract yourself with observations about the beautiful scenery along the road, or you engage in pleasant conversation with fellow passengers. The Jewish atheist philosopher Ernst Becker says in his book, The Denial of Death, that in the face of our own mortality, we usually turn to one of 3 things to console ourselves, all 3 of which we see here in Daniel 5. First, he said, we boast about our accomplishments, as if these accomplishments give us some sort of immortality. We try to tell ourselves that we've done something that's added meaning to human history, and our significance, therefore, will last forever. We've really helped advance our career field. Or we console ourselves that we've left a legacy that will help future generations of our family live well. We see Belshazzar doing that here. He brings all the gold and silver that they plundered from other kingdoms to show that Babylon is special. Second, Becker said, we turn to romance. We find meaning in the thrills of sex or in the feeling of being treasured by somebody. Their love justifies us, gives us a reason to live. Again, consoling ourselves in the face of our own mortality. We see Belshazzar's party was filled with wives, concubines, sex. Finally, he said, we turn to religion to show that for whatever is out there, we're worthy of it. We use religion to console ourselves that we're the best of all people and that for whatever's next, we'll be counted worthy. You could see that in Belshazzar and his extravagant toasting of their gods. So Becker, who was an atheist, said human beings cannot live in full, honest awareness of the meaning of death. Even if you're one of those rare people that others still talk about 10 years after you're gone, one day our sun itself will burn up, and then there will be no trace that any of us have ever even existed. Becker says that when we die, we're gone and nothing matters, which is true unless it's done for the kingdom of God, who outlasts time and whose rule extends beyond the grave. Steve Jobs, Apple's legendary founder and CEO, was asked on 60 Minutes right before he died whether he believed in God or not. He said, it can't be that when we die, that it all just fades to black. He said, sometimes I believe in God, sometimes I don't. I think it's 50-50 maybe. But ever since I've had cancer, I've been thinking about it more. And if I find myself believing a bit more, maybe it's because I want to believe in an afterlife, that when you die, it doesn't just all disappear. The wisdom you've accumulated, somehow it lives on. Incidentally, he said, that's why he never liked to put on-off switches on Apple devices. He just didn't like the idea of being able to flip a switch and turn something off. Sometimes I think it's just like an on-off switch. He said, click and you're gone. So I ask you, what is your life? Are you prepared for the end? It's appointed unto man once to die. You see, the only difference between Belshazzar and us is that he was told the day he would die. We may not know the exact day like he did, but we're just as certain of that day's inevitability. Only one life to live. Are you prepared to meet God? Isn't that really the only question that eternally matters? A second point from this chapter, our wise men have failed us. A repeated theme of Daniel is a failure of Babylon's wise men to deliver when the questions really mattered. Obviously, the wise men contribute something to Babylonian knowledge, or the king wouldn't have kept them around. But consistently, we read that when there's a really important dream or vision or question, they let the king down. And each of those times, Daniel comes on the scene and reveals that there's a God in heaven who can do what the wise men can't. There comes a point at which the wise men of every age and every culture fail. So let me ask you to consider, who would qualify as our wise men today? You could say scientists. And let me be clear, science and scientists are wonderful gifts of God to be revered and celebrated and trusted in their spheres of authority. But we see places today where science fails us, right? Or at least it's proven unable to answer questions that we really need answers to. Somebody says to me today, I only believe in science. Science is all I need. Really? Can science tell you what's right and wrong? Can it tell you what your purpose is? No. As soon as a scientist stops looking through a microscope and starts philosophizing about the meaning of life, they've left science and they're engaging in superstition or philosophy. Foundationless pontifications about the unknown. Science can tell us the what, but not the why. Only the Creator can give us the why. Only something that is before the material world and beyond it can give us meaning. So science is awesome, but it fails us on the ultimate questions of life. I would add politicians and educators to our list of wise men, but haven't they also proven unable to solve humanity's primary problem? Has any political philosophy proved able to correct the human impulses toward corruption, greed, or abuse of power? The point is simply that our political and educational wise men and women have also proven unable to cure on any large scale the problems of the human race at their core, in their source, which is our own hearts. So just as with Babylon, when it comes to ultimate questions about our wise men, from Stephen Hawking to Steve Jobs to party leaders on the left and right, have all failed us. We need a word from God. That's why Daniel, by the way, won't let Belshazzar pay him to provide the interpretation. He says in verse 17, you may keep your gifts and give your rewards to somebody else. I will read the inscription for the king and make the interpretation known to him free of charge. In other words, this isn't my word, it's God's. You're offering me money as if this message comes from me or belongs to me, but that's not how this works. All I can do is tell you the truth. Brookridge and our friends and fellow churches and family, you need a word from God, and that word doesn't come from me. I could deliver it to you, but it comes from him. By the way, don't forget that the wise men who saw the star in the sky and came to see the baby Jesus were from this region. Babylon, of course, had long since fallen by then, but the traditions and the writings of the wise men had remained. And isn't it interesting that somehow in their traditions, they had been taught to look toward heaven for a clue about how the world would ultimately be saved? That should give you chills, right? Through encounters like this, they were taught that for ultimate answers about human purpose and destiny, you have to look toward heaven. And one day God put a star there and he said, hey, here's your answer. And 500 years after Daniel 5, a group of them showed up to see the baby Jesus. The encounters in Daniel taught them to look to heaven for the ultimate salvation of the world. I think that's really cool. And that's where we're going to end tonight. And we will start talking about the writings on the wall for all of us next week. And also that the finger of God has appeared to this generation. Appreciate y'all. Listen to Sam this Sunday. I'll be here too, monitoring. I'm not going to do a rebuttal of his message, but we're excited to hear from him this Sunday in Psalm 37. Excited to be doing life with you all. And we appreciate the technology that allows us to gather for a few minutes